Well, let me tell you, one of the main things I enjoy about being at an AAPS meeting and the contrast with other meetings, such as the Arizona Medical Association meeting. Every time I go to the big banquet at an ARMA meeting, I feel like I am in the first scene in Dr. Zhivago, where all of the czarist aristocrats are at this fancy dress ball. And none of them have any inkling of what's going on outside as the Bolsheviks are planning to revolt. At least at AAPS meetings, I feel that everybody's awake and understands something about the gravity of our situation. I recently saw a financial newsletter that had a picture on it about the ways that concrete is tested. They take a concrete pillar or something and they keep loading it and loading it and loading it. And it just sits there until it just crumbles. That it could be that we're in a situation where the system that's kind of been going along, compensated like a patient with congestive heart failure, could suddenly just decompensate. And this is possibly an actual strategy, such as the Cloward-Piven strategy that Richard Ammerling awakened us to. So I'm supposed to talk about why doctors can't wait for Congress. Well, there are a couple reasons. One is that Congress probably won't do anything of the sort that needs to be done. None of the candidates, as you saw from the debate last night, is even talking about how dire the situation is. They probably don't dare. And we've seen what they've done before. After the Clinton plan went down to defeat, what did the Republicans do? They enacted HIPAA, which was a big chunk of the Clinton plan. And it's also possible that Congress can't even do anything. Maybe you've seen the video circulating on the internet about why Congress can't balance the budget. Well, it's because interest on the debt plus entitlements or mandatory spending eats up every bit of the revenue that comes in. So we are financing everything else, including the military, with borrowing from our enemies, such as the Chinese and the Arabs, or potential enemies. So we can't wait. Nevertheless, we are not giving up on Congress, and Charlie Sauer, who will come after me, will give you some reasons for optimism on that front. I want to talk a little bit about my least favorite platitude. Actually, I get annoyed because people are sending this to me so much. Much as we can admire Edmund Burke for many reasons, I think he was just totally wrong about this. This is Pollyanna-ish, and I think just plain wrong. There's a lot more that's necessary for evil to triumph, at least transiently. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes who the good men are, and sometimes doing nothing is exactly what good men have to do, and sometimes it's the only thing that they really can do. So I will spend some time today giving us a little bit of historical perspective. I'm following up on something that our past president, Lee Heeb, did so wonderfully in a past meeting. She talked about Karl Brandt, and the video of her presentation is available online, and her article in the journal is also available. And if you don't have to write down that whole URL, you can just go to aapsonline.org and search under Heeb, H-I-E-B. Well, this period of history has been of great interest to me also. You've probably read Leonard Peikoff's book, Ominous Parallels, or at least you've heard about that. Many people have thought that the biggest threat to the United States is not communism, but rather fascism. It's been a very popular idea in the United States. Even at the time of World War II, a lot of people in the US liked the idea. And recently, even Ira Magaziner, who you may recall was the head of the Clinton Healthcare Task Force, was in favor of what is now called euphemistically the public-private partnership. So I think that it is a real danger, and we need to understand something about what that entails. Another reason for my interest is my father. He served in the Mighty Eighth. He was the radio operator, navigator, and gunner on a B-24 Liberator. something of a miracle that he survived because he loved to tell war stories about how they lost 3 pilots and walked home 4 times. That was at the highest casualty rate in the U.S. Army. And I have been studying something about it recently because a friend of mine invited me to a German class where I kept going, partly because I love the 90-year-old World War II veterans in the class. And some of them were veterans of the Wehrmacht. So to write my German assignments, I've been looking at some German films that you can get on Amazon.com. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I've learned from some of these. The first one, called Nowhere in Africa, was about a German Jewish lawyer who saw what was happening in Germany, and he went to Africa and got a job on a British plantation, so, probably in what is now Kenya. He got his wife and daughter to join him reluctantly. Their parents refused to leave Germany. They said, "We're as German as anybody. We get along well. Germany is the most civilized country in history, the land of Goethe and Schiller. All this unpleasantness is going to blow over, and in a couple of years, everything will be back to normal." Well, in a couple years, all of them had died in Nazi concentration camps. So denial is a very is a characteristic that the human race has in great supply. Then there's a movie, Sophie Scholl, that I think particularly the young people here might want to get. Sophie Scholl was a college student, and she was active in a resistance organization called the Weiße Rose, or the White Rose. And she and her brother were distributing pamphlets at the university describing what Hitler was really doing. She was arrested and executed and made the most eloquent plea at her trial. Well worth getting that movie. The third one is very surprising, The Blind Spot. It is a spellbinding movie, and can you imagine there is nothing in that movie except an 80-year-old woman talking to the camera, reminiscing about what she did when she was 22. She was Traudl Junge, who was one of Hitler's private secretaries. And she makes an appearance in Downfall. If you search Downfall parodies on the internet, you'll find quite a lot of them. This was a great meme, Downfall parodies. It shows Hitler ranting in the bunker with ridiculous English subtitles, and a lot of people have done this as sort of a humorous kind of thing. It did not strike me as funny because it's such a serious subject, and Hitler actually was not a parody at all. The movie Downfall is an extraordinary German film. It is not a pro-Nazi film by any means. It did break a taboo in that it had an author trying to portray Hitler in a totally realistic fashion, and he was said to have gotten the voice and the Austrian accent just about perfect. So this whole film is worth watching, but it's not just about Hitler that's so fascinating. It's about all of those people who were in the bunker with him. Because Hitler did not do all of that harm by himself. And admittedly, these people don't look like the Nazis, the stereotypical Nazi caricatures in Indiana Jones. They look sort of like human beings. The only person in that bunker that struck me as being 100% evil was Goebbels, who was far worse than Hitler. Hitler had a few human characteristics every now and then, and after all, he was insane. But Goebbels was brilliant, 100% rational, and maybe Lucifer or the Prince of Lies himself. And a couple of interesting insights from Goebbels. He was in charge of the Volksturm, which was the force of civilians that was helping to defend Berlin. He used children and old men and deployed them in such a way that they were guaranteed to be slaughtered within 5 minutes for no purpose whatsoever. And one of the generals criticized him for that. And he said, "Blame the people. The people gave us the mandate. And now they're crying because their little throats are being cut." So the people are guilty. They voted for this mess. Another scene that's well worth reviewing is Hitler's marriage to Eva Braun. They had a sub-official, probably a judge, officiating, And he said, well, by law, I'm required to ask you, are you of pure Aryan blood? And Hitler said, yeah. You wouldn't guess it to look at him, but that's what he said. And then the judge said, well, could we see the evidence? And Goebbels immediately shouted, you are talking to our Führer. And then the judge just went on to something else, that a different law applies to the person who's in charge. By the way, one of the veterans in our German class said his assignment was to interview German prisoners of war, and he did interview a father and son who were in the Volkssturm. The father was 80 years old, and the son was 60 years old. But as Hitler said, in this struggle, there are no civilians. At the time of Hitler, there was really kind of a cultural revolution, and some of the ideas that predominated there are chillingly similar to some of the ones that we have now, one of them being that men are no different from the apes, and that man or the individual is subservient to society, and societies or the government needs must come first. Other people who were in the bunker. One of the questions that has puzzled my German teacher, who was born in Vienna and was kicked out of the Hitler Jugend at age 9 for being insubordinate, and it's a miracle that she and her family survived. She said, why did the German generals go along with this foreigner who was clearly crazy? This man had just sort of a hypnotic effect on people. And the women were especially surprising. I mean, this was no tall, handsome blonde, and yet they were throwing themselves at his feet and pleading with him not to kill himself. What are we going to do if you die? And then there was Albert Speer. Some people called him the good Nazi, or at least he perhaps was not entirely evil. Why was he doing what he did? He reminisced with Hitler about the models. They had beautiful models in the bunker that they had built. They had a vision of a beautiful Germany with centers of culture and art. And Hitler said, that was my vision, and it still is. You know, the bombing raids had a good side, that it's much easier to clear away rubble than it is to tear down everything to start from scratch. And Speer was evident. One of the things Speer tried to do was to dissuade Hitler from his scorched earth policy against the Germans. When it became clear that Germany was losing the war, Hitler was tearing down everything. He said, look, you do away with electricity, with clean water, with the canals and with the railroads. The German people have no way to survive. And Hitler said, well, why should I be concerned about that? The people let me down. They are weak. They deserve to die. The best of them have been killed anyway. It's the law of nature, and I have always abided by the law of nature. This culture of death, the culture of euthanasia, actually didn't start in Germany. A lot of it started in the United States, and although it kind of fell into disfavor when the atrocities of the Holocaust came to light, it certainly didn't die. Albert Speer, when in his time in prison, he admitted, he started out, he was following Hitler not to do something evil, but to build this great architecture. And he deliberately closed his eyes. He would not go to Auschwitz to find out what was going on. There was denial there, too. Something for your reading list, Inside the Third Reich by Albert Speer. Given what's going on today, I wanted to read one little piece of this. And he said, the nightmare shared by many people that someday the nations of the world may be dominated by technology. That nightmare system that was very nearly made a reality under Hitler's authoritarian system. The more technological the world becomes, the more essential will be the demand for individual freedom and the self-awareness of the individual human being as a counterpoise to technology. So these electronic health records are very much of a threat, but of course this electronic technology can be used for the good also to fight against all of this. Some other great books. The Chief Culprit by Viktor Suvorov kind of gave me a different view of Hitler. He was a Soviet intelligence analyst and pointed out that Hitler never would have been anybody except for Stalin. He would have ended his days in a Munich Bierstube talking about his failed putsch because Germany was in no position to make war. They didn't even have enough wood to make railroad ties. They were dependent on Scandinavia, and Stalin could have cut their supply lines. Then there's some other things about the political system in the U.S., the capital punishment by Jack Abramoff, one of the most accomplished, notorious lobbyists of all time, who says, don't blame the lobbyists, blame the system. The government has too much power. Industries have to invest in lobbyists because the government can crush them if they don't. Then Throw Them All Out by Robert Schweitzer. Maybe one of the few politicians that seems to know what's going on is Art Robinson, and you can get his book Common Sense on artrobinsonforcongress.com and read about what our situation really is. What does it take for evil to triumph? You need a charismatic leader, and he doesn't have to be very attractive. Look at Hitler, the kind of grip he had on everybody, including Speer, was unbelievable. The leader is exempt from the rule of law. He just doesn't have to follow the rules that everybody else. There's a certain hubris, these people believing that they could build utopia, this great system, and something always comes in the way of utopia, that people don't do what they want, or there are people who are inferior. They may be Jews, or they may be degenerates, or they may be the weak. This eugenics idea that started in the US is still common. They need to have resources, like they get support from outside, and sometimes it's hard to know exactly what is going on there. These Germans who were in the bunker with him were not just good men doing nothing, they were collaborating with him. And we have collaborators all over. And why are they doing that? Maybe it's the double effect. They're not doing it in order to be evil, they're doing it in order to accomplish something that they see as good. At our Catholic hospital, I remember them talking about the double effect. You know, if you give a terminal patient morphine to relieve pain and he dies a little bit sooner, well, that's okay, you didn't kill him, it's the double effect. Well, to me, this seemed to be just pure common sense until they had to bring in a highly credentialed ethicist to explain it to us in 2 or 3 hours. Then it started to sound more like a rationalization than like common sense. We have a lot of seductive bad ideas that are still going on today. And then there's the AMA Code of Ethics. And this is one reason why I don't belong to the AMA, because you have to sign on to this. Maybe you translate this differently from how I do, but it means that maybe you have to obey the law. You can seek changes in it, but you have to obey. I had some correspondence with Stormy Johnson at one time saying, well, what if the law requires you to do something really evil, like kill your patient? I mean, do you have to abide by the law then? And I never got an answer out of him. So I don't know what that means. But when a lot of our colleagues are saying, we're not going along with Medicare to do evil, we're going along because we need to do it to help our patients and to help doctors to survive under the system so that they can serve their patients, it's all part of the double effect. So what should we do? Well, what all good men to do is they need to resist the cult of personality. I think the Muslims who attack cartoonists, we may not like what they do, but they really are not stupid politically. Those cartoonists truly are a threat. If you ridicule this person, if you make a parody out of him, it undermines his hypnotic effect. You need to insist that the law applies to all. You need to have some humility about your ability to solve all the problems of the world with the one monolithic plan. You have to starve the beast. That's why we need to fight against tax increases. Non-participation has been the policy of AAPS since the beginning. We need to stand on principle, and we need to follow the example of Sam Houston, whose dictionary actually blacked out the word compromise. That we must never compromise on matters of principle. And we need to educate Congress about the basics that I think a lot of them truly don't understand. Like, if we're going to save medicine, we need to get to the 3 C's that Dr. Heeb so brilliantly pointed out: cash, catastrophic insurance, and charity, that Obamacare threatens to obliterate. And we do support our physicians, and I like quoting this Russian proverb that you'll know it's true when it happens to you, because when people say all of this bad stuff can't be happening, oh yes, it can.